The Wood TV studios in Grand Rapids were electric with anticipation on that crucial October evening. Michigan's most critical Senate race had brought together two formidable candidates, Democratic Representative Elissa Slotkin and Republican former Representative Mike Rogers. This debate would help determine who would fill the seat left vacant by retiring Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow, and both candidates knew that every word, every gesture, every moment could shift the trajectory of a race that would help determine control of the United States Senate moderator. Rick Albin could feel the tension as he prepared to begin what would become one of the most consequential political debates in recent Michigan history. The studio audience, comprised of carefully selected voters from across the political spectrum, sat in respectful silence, but the energy was palpable. Camera operators made final adjustments, knowing that the moments they captured tonight would be dissected, analyzed, and replayed countless times in the coming weeks. Both candidates had arrived with their teams, their strategies carefully planned, their talking points memorized. But neither could have anticipated how dramatically this evening would unfold, how a few key exchanges would not only define the debate but potentially determine the outcome of the entire race. Slotkin, a three-term congresswoman and former CIA analyst, sat composed at her podium. Her background included 3 tours of duty in Iraq, years of intelligence work, and a reputation for thorough preparation. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying Rogers' record, anticipating his attacks, and preparing her responses with the precision of someone trained in the art of strategic thinking. Rogers, who had served in the House from 2001 to 2015 and chaired the Intelligence Committee, carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned politician. His FBI background and years of congressional experience had taught him the value of aggressive questioning and strategic positioning. He came into this debate believing that his experience and Slotkin's perceived vulnerabilities would give him the advantage he needed. What neither candidate fully understood was how the combination of their backgrounds, 2 former intelligence professionals turned politicians, would create a powder keg that would explode in spectacular fashion before the night was over. The debate began with the expected pleasantries and policy discussions. Both candidates emphasized their bipartisan credentials, their commitment to Michigan values, and their readiness to serve in the Senate. Slotkin highlighted her rating as the 14th most bipartisan member of Congress, while Rogers promised to look for every opportunity to be bipartisan. The early questions covered familiar territory: the economy, healthcare, and manufacturing jobs. Both candidates stayed largely on message, delivering well-rehearsed responses that their campaigns had perfected over months of preparation. Slotkin emphasized her support for American manufacturing and her concerns about protecting workers' rights. Rogers focused on his opposition to what he characterized as failed Democratic policies and his commitment to fiscal responsibility. But underneath the surface civility, both candidates were probing for weaknesses, looking for openings, waiting for the moment when they could land a decisive blow. The audience could sense the underlying tension, the careful calculation behind every answer, the strategic positioning that would soon give way to something much more dramatic. The first hint of the fireworks to come appeared during a discussion about electric vehicles. Rogers had positioned himself as an opponent of EV mandates and electric vehicle manufacturing incentives, arguing that they threaten traditional automotive jobs in Michigan. It was a calculated position designed to appeal to union workers who might be concerned about the transition to electric vehicles. "You beat China by selling Americans cars they want to buy," Rogers said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed he had identified a winning message. Slotkin pushed back immediately, arguing that opposition to electric vehicle development was effectively ceding ground to China in a critical technological race. "If we don't lead in this sector, China will leave us behind," she responded, setting the stage for what would become the evening's most explosive exchanges. It was during this discussion of electric vehicles and manufacturing policy that Rogers decided to deploy what he believed would be his most devastating attack. His campaign had been building toward this moment for weeks, believing they had discovered Slotkin's Achilles heel, her alleged connection to Chinese business interests through a non-disclosure agreement. Rogers leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to reveal a crucial piece of information. "I understand why Representative Slotkin is so defensive about this issue," he said, pausing for effect. It's because she signed a non-disclosure agreement to facilitate a Chinese Communist Party company setting up operations near Big Rapids. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the cameras and lighting equipment. This wasn't just a policy disagreement anymore. This was a direct attack on Slotkin's integrity, her patriotism, and her fitness for office. Slotkin's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in the kind of controlled anger that comes from years of training in high-stakes situations. As a former CIA analyst, she had faced hostile interrogations and dangerous situations, but this attack was different. This was personal, professional, and potentially devastating to her political career. "Mr. Rogers," she said, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge, "what you just said is completely false. And it's disappointing that you would run a campaign based on such misleading information." But Rogers wasn't finished. He had committed to this line of attack, and he pressed forward with what he believed was damning evidence. "This isn't just an allegation. There are documents. Representative Slotkin signed a non-disclosure agreement with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation regarding the Goshen Project. This means helping the Chinese Communist Party gain influence in Michigan." The exchange was now fully engaged, and both candidates seemed to understand that this moment would define not just the debate, but potentially the entire race. What happened next demonstrated why Slotkin's CIA training had prepared her for far more than just intelligence analysis. When under attack, she didn't retreat or deflect. Instead, she methodically and systematically destroyed Rogers' credibility with the precision of a trained investigator. "Mr. Rogers," she said, standing up from her podium and turning to face him directly, "since you want to discuss my record of truthfulness, let's examine yours." The decision to stand was calculated and dramatic. It signaled that this was no longer a routine policy debate, but a confrontation between two very different visions of political conduct. "You want to talk about non-disclosure agreements and Chinese connections? Let's discuss your work after leaving Congress. You served in advisory roles for AT&T and Nokia. What exactly were those companies' relationships with Chinese entities during your tenure?" Rogers, clearly not expecting this counterattack, shifted uncomfortably. "That's completely different." "How is it different?" Slotkin pressed. "You're an expert on national security, aren't you? So surely you were aware of these companies' China operations when you chose to work with them." But Slotkin wasn't finished dismantling Rogers' attack. She reached into her preparation. The kind of thorough research that intelligence professionals learn to do, and delivered her most devastating blow. "Let me address your specific claims about the non-disclosure agreement," she continued, her voice gaining strength and authority. "Yes, I signed an NDA with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation in 2022. It covered 2 potential projects that were referred to only by code names. Neither of those projects was the Goshen facility." Rogers tried to interrupt. "But it was later amended?" "Yes." "It was amended," Slotkin continued, not allowing him to regain control of the narrative, "in December 2022. But here's what Mr. Rogers either doesn't know or is choosing to ignore. The Goshen project was already publicly announced by Governor Whitmer in October 2022, 2 months before my NDA was amended." The factual precision of this response demonstrated something that would become a theme throughout the rest of the debate. Slotkin had come prepared with specific details, while Rogers had come with talking points that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Then came the moment that would be remembered as the turning point of the entire debate. Slotkin delivered what political commentators would later describe as a perfect example of how to turn a personal attack into a character assassination of the attacker. "This is a lie," she said, her voice carrying both disappointment and anger. "The old Mike Rogers from 2014 wouldn't have played games with national security issues like this. But the Mike Rogers of 2024 seems happy to do it." The phrase "old Mike Rogers" was devastating because it accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously. It suggested that Rogers had compromised his principles for political gain. It implied that his current behavior was inconsistent with his previous reputation, and it positioned Slotkin as someone who had known and respected Rogers in the past, but was disappointed by what he had become. "I'm sad about that," Slotkin continued, and the genuine emotion in her voice made the attack even more powerful. "I know you, Mr. Rogers. We worked together in Congress. The Mike Rogers I knew then wouldn't have resorted to these kinds of tactics. Rogers, clearly stung by this personal rebuke, tried to regain control. Representative Slotkin, the documents are clear. The non-disclosure agreement exists and stop. Slotkin interrupted, her voice rising with controlled fury. It's a lie, and aren't you ashamed of repeating these lies? If the China controversy had wounded Rogers, what came next would prove to be politically fatal. Perhaps sensing that his initial attack had backfired, or perhaps simply desperate to regain the offensive, Rogers made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of the campaign. You know, Rogers said, his voice taking on a tone that made everyone in the studio lean forward. My opponent likes to talk about her CIA background, her analytical work, her time in Iraq. But after watching her performance tonight, after seeing how she twists facts and misrepresents records, I'm not even sure she could pass the polygraph test for the CIA anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. What Rogers had just done was unprecedented in modern political debate. He had essentially accused a former CIA officer of being such a habitual liar that she couldn't pass a polygraph test, the same tests that every intelligence officer takes as a routine part of their security clearance process. The attack was personal, professional, and devastating in its implications. It questioned not just Slotkin's political positions, but her fundamental integrity as a person who had served her country in some of its most sensitive positions. Slotkin's reaction was swift and surgical. Excuse me? She said, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you just question my ability to pass a polygraph test? Rogers, perhaps realizing he had crossed a line but unable to back down now, doubled down. I'm just saying, based on what we've seen tonight, based on the misrepresentations. Stop right there, Slotkin cut him off, her voice slicing through the studio like a blade. You just questioned the integrity of someone who served this country in some of its most dangerous assignments. You just questioned someone who was cleared at the highest levels of government for years. What happened next was a masterclass in political combat, delivered by someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of high-stakes confrontation. Let me tell you about polygraph tests, Mr. Rogers, Slotkin said, her voice carrying the authority of lived experience. I've taken more polygraph tests than you've probably seen in your entire career. Every CIA officer does. And you know what they test for? Honesty, integrity, loyalty to country. The specificity and personal nature of her response made it impossible for Rogers to respond effectively. She wasn't speaking in political generalities. She was speaking from direct, personal experience that he couldn't match or challenge. You want to talk about polygraph tests? She continued, her momentum building. Let's discuss your own record of truth-telling. In 2016, you said you had grave concerns about Donald Trump's fitness for office. By 2024, you're seeking his endorsement. Which version was the truth, Mr. Rogers? This was devastating because it took Rogers' attack and turned it back on him, questioning his own consistency and integrity. But Slotkin wasn't finished. That's not evolution, she said, when Rogers tried to explain his changing positions. That's calculation. Pure political calculation. And if we're talking about polygraph tests, I wonder how you'd answer questions about your real motivations for running for Senate. The debate had now moved far beyond policy differences into the realm of personal character and fitness for office. Slotkin, having successfully defended herself against Rogers' attacks, now went on the offensive with surgical precision. You left Michigan for Florida, she continued, her voice gaining momentum as she hit stride. You built a life there, bought property there, established residency there, and now you come back here, to the state you abandoned, claiming you want to serve its people. How do you think you'd do on a polygraph about your real commitment to Michigan? The Florida residency issue had been a vulnerability for Rogers throughout the campaign, but Slotkin's delivery made it devastatingly effective in this context. By tying it to the polygraph test that Rogers had raised, she made it impossible for him to dismiss as a mere technicality. Rogers' face was visibly flushing now, his discomfort apparent even under the studio lights. I never abandoned Michigan, really, Slotkin interrupted, because the public records show you were living in a $1.7 million home in Cape Coral, Florida, until you decided to run for Senate. That doesn't sound like someone committed to Michigan. Then came the moment that would be replayed countless times on social media and news programs, what political commentators would immediately recognize as a knockout punch in political debate. Terms, Mr. Rogers, Slotkin said, her voice carrying the full weight of her intelligence background and personal conviction. "I've served this country in Iraq in dangerous assignments, with clearances you couldn't even imagine. I've been polygraphed by the best interrogators in the world, and I've passed every single time because I tell the truth." She paused, letting that sink in before delivering her final, devastating line. The question Michigan voters should be asking is, if you're willing to lie about my record this blatantly in front of cameras, what lies are you telling them when the cameras are off? Rogers sat in stunned silence. For perhaps the first time in his political career, he appeared completely speechless. The man who had built his reputation on aggressive questioning and strategic communication had been systematically dismantled by someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of confrontation. The rest of the debate continued, but everyone in the studio knew it was effectively over. Rogers never recovered his footing, appearing defensive and rattled for the remainder of the evening. Slotkin, meanwhile, maintained her commanding presence throughout the remaining segments, having established complete control of the narrative. When the debate concluded, the immediate reaction from the press gallery was electric. Veteran political reporters who had covered hundreds of debates and political confrontations recognized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah Johnson from the Detroit Free Press was overheard saying to a colleague, "In 20 years of covering Michigan politics, I've never seen anything like that." Rogers just committed political suicide on live television. Political analyst Mark Stevens was already crafting his immediate reaction on social media. That polygraph comment will haunt Rogers for the rest of this campaign. You don't question a CIA officer's integrity unless you have specific evidence, and Rogers clearly didn't. The debate exchanges went viral within minutes of the broadcast's conclusion. Polygraphgate began trending nationwide within 15 minutes, with video clips of Slotkin's responses being shared thousands of times across all major social media platforms. The most shared clip was Slotkin's final response about being polygraphed by the best interrogators in the world, often accompanied by captions like "former CIA officer schools amateur politician" and "this is what happens when you question a spy's honesty." Conservative commentators attempted to defend Rogers, arguing that Slotkin's response was over the top and too aggressive for a Senate candidate, but even some Republican analysts privately admitted that Rogers had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Fox News political contributor Sarah Palin tweeted, "Respect to both candidates, but Rogers walked into that one. You don't question someone's service record without bulletproof evidence." Meanwhile, Democratic supporters celebrated what they saw as a perfect example of how to respond to unfair attacks. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is how you respond to bad faith attacks on your service and integrity. Factual, fierce, and absolutely devastating." Political communication experts immediately recognized the debate as a case study in strategic communication, crisis response, and the dangers of unprepared attacks. Dr. Patricia Williams, a political communication expert at Michigan State University, offered this analysis in the immediate aftermath. Rogers made a fundamental miscalculation. He tried to use Slotkin's greatest strength, her intelligence background, against her. But when you attack someone's professional credibility in their area of expertise, you better be prepared for them to know how to fight back. And clearly Rogers wasn't prepared. Former FBI counterintelligence agent Michael Thompson, now a CNN contributor, was even more direct in his assessment. What Rogers did was inexcusable from a professional standpoint. You don't question the integrity of someone who served in the intelligence community unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing. It was a cheap shot that backfired spectacularly, and it showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how intelligence professionals are trained to respond to attacks. Dr. James Madison, a professor of political science at the University of Michigan, provided historical context. We've seen personal attacks in debates before, but this was different. This was an attack on someone's professional competence in an area where they have demonstrable expertise and a distinguished record. It's political malpractice of the highest order. The debate's impact extended far beyond the immediate media coverage. In the 48 hours following the broadcast, Slotkin's campaign reported a 300% increase in online donations, with contributions pouring in from across the country. Many of the donation messages specifically referenced the debate exchange, with donors expressing admiration for how Slotkin had defended herself. "I've never donated to a Michigan race before," wrote one donor from California, "but after seeing how she stood up to those attacks, I had to contribute." That's the kind of backbone we need in the Senate. Meanwhile, Rogers faced pressure from some Republican donors and supporters to apologize for his comments about the polygraph test. A group of Republican veterans issued a statement expressing disappointment with Rogers' attack on Slotkin's service record, though they stopped short of withdrawing their endorsement. Internal polling conducted by both campaigns in the days following the debate showed immediate movement in Slotkin's favor, particularly among veterans, military families, and independent voters, demographics that Rogers had been counting on to remain competitive.
Every visit to a park is a lesson in beauty.
Political consultants and communication experts immediately began analyzing the debate for lessons that could be applied to future campaigns and debates. The importance of preparation became a key takeaway. Slotkin's ability to respond with specific facts and dates demonstrated the value of thorough research and preparation. Rogers' apparent surprise at her responses suggested that his team had not adequately prepared for potential counterattacks. The power of personal testimony also emerged as a crucial factor. Slotkin's ability to speak from direct personal experience about polygraph tests and intelligence work gave her responses an authenticity and authority that Rogers couldn't match. Political historians began comparing the Michigan Senate debate to other pivotal moments in American political debate history. Some drew parallels to Lloyd Benson's "You're no Jack Kennedy" moment in the 1988 vice presidential debate, while others compared it to Ronald Reagan's "There you go again" response to Jimmy Carter in 1980. What made the Michigan debate unique was the specific professional background of the candidates involved. The confrontation between two former intelligence professionals brought a level of strategic thinking and tactical precision that is rarely seen in typical political debates. As the dust settled from the debate, the consensus among political observers was clear. Slotkin had not only successfully defended herself against Rogers' attacks, but had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the race in her favor. Rogers' decision to attack Slotkin's intelligence background and question her ability to pass a polygraph test would be remembered as one of the most spectacular strategic failures in recent political history. He had taken his opponent's greatest strength and tried to turn it into a weakness, only to discover that she was far better prepared for that kind of fight than he was. For Slotkin, the debate represented a moment when her unique background and training proved to be decisive political assets. Her ability to remain calm under attack, respond with precision and authority, and turn her opponent's aggression against him demonstrated why intelligence professionals can be formidable political candidates when they choose to run for office. In the weeks and months following the debate, the Michigan Senate race became a case study in political communication programs across the country. The exchange between Rogers and Slotkin was dissected in graduate seminars, analyzed in political science journals, and referenced in campaign training sessions. For Michigan voters, the debate provided a clear illustration of the choice they faced in the Senate race. On one side was a candidate who had proven she could remain calm and effective under pressure, who had the knowledge and experience to back up her claims, and who could defend herself and her record with intelligence and precision. On the other side was a candidate who had made serious strategic errors, who had launched attacks he couldn't sustain, and who had appeared unprepared for the most important moment of his campaign. The debate changed the trajectory of the Michigan Senate race and provided a blueprint for how political figures can defend themselves against character assassination. It demonstrated that in an era of increasingly personal political attacks, candidates with genuine expertise and authentic experience still have powerful advantages. Most importantly, it served as a reminder that, in politics, as in intelligence work, preparation, precision, and the truth remain the most powerful weapons of all. The Michigan Senate debate of 2024 will be remembered not just as a political victory for Elissa Slotkin, but as a masterclass in how strategic thinking professional training, and personal integrity can triumph over cynical political calculation. In the end, the debate proved that while political campaigns may be won through strategy and tactics, they are ultimately decided by character, competence, and the ability to perform under pressure when it matters most. On that October evening in Grand Rapids, Elissa Slotkin demonstrated all three qualities in abundance, while Mike Rogers discovered that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, and some mistakes cannot be undone.